This is the story of a woman who is told to sit down, of a town that values silence over sincerity, and of a single act of defiance that changed everything. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been told your voice is too loud, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up to join the community. And as we start our story, tell us in the comments below who you think runs Washington, the people or the establishment. The West Wing corridors buzzed with a specific, cautious energy. It was the hum of ambition, fear, and caffeine that fueled the gears of power just past 9 a.m. Karoline Levit, at 27, was already on her second espresso and fourth policy briefing. Her heels clicked a confident rhythm on the marble floors, a stark contrast to the whispered anxieties around her. A silver cross at her collar, a quiet emblem of her unwavering faith, shone under the fluorescent lights, a beacon in a sea of gray suits and muted expressions. She moved with purpose, the kind of focus that had made her the youngest White House press secretary in history, and the most outspoken. Her loyalty to Donald Trump was not just a political stance, it was a conviction. Her media takedowns were sharp, her defense of the administration was fearless, and she had become a force to be reckoned with. She was a voice that didn't just speak, it thundered. But that morning, the tone shifted. Emma, her chief of staff and the only person who could match Karoline's pace, intercepted her outside the Roosevelt room. Her voice was low, urgent. "Kevin McCarthy wants to see you, alone." Karoline blinked, the name echoing in the quiet hallway. "Did he say why?" Emma hesitated, her eyes flickering with concern. He didn't have to. His aide looked tense. McCarthy. The name carried weight. Former Speaker of the House, a GOP kingmaker, and one of the architects of party strategy. He didn't call meetings without motive, and certainly not without an agenda. Karoline straightened her blazer, a silent armor against the uncertainty. She walked down the narrow, hallowed hallway toward the office he occasionally used, the walls lined with framed executive orders and historical photos of men who had defined the very notion of power. It all felt oddly, unnaturally quiet. She knocked once. A voice from inside said, "Come in." McCarthy stood at the window, hands behind him, looking out at the city he helped shape. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. There was no staff, no notes, just the two of them. "Karoline," he said smoothly, a smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You've made quite a name for yourself." She smiled tightly, her guard up. "I'd like to think I've earned it." He nodded, the smile fading into a sigh. "Which is why we have a problem." The air thickened, and Karoline felt a familiar cold dread. A political wind was shifting. The party's shifting, the media's watching every move, donors are nervous. You're too loud, too raw, and honestly, too dangerous. Dangerous how? Karoline narrowed her eyes, her voice a steel blade. McCarthy stepped closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "The base loves you, but leadership doesn't. Trump might back you today, but politics change fast. So here's what I'm asking. Step down, gracefully. Write the letter, hand it in quietly, say it's personal. You'll be back someday." He placed a blank manila envelope on the table, a dare in plain sight. "You have until Friday." And with that, he left her alone in the room with nothing but the silence, a chair, and the sound of her heartbeat pounding like a war drum.
Karoline sat in the silent, imposing office, the manila envelope on the table before her like a dare. The fluorescent light above flickered slightly, a quiet heartbeat in the tense stillness of the room. Her fingers hovered over the paper, but she didn't reach for it. She wasn't afraid. She was furious. McCarthy's words echoed in her mind, a relentless drumbeat, too loud, too raw, and honestly, too dangerous. Dangerous, she mused, was a word used to describe things that could not be controlled. It wasn't an accusation of incompetence, but a recognition of her power. She had faced down journalists, activists, and late-night comedians. She had taken every punch the opposition could throw. But this was different. This warning came from inside her own ranks, from someone who should have been her ally. They wanted her gone not because she had failed, but because she had succeeded in shaking things too much, in making them feel uncomfortable. The very qualities they had once praised were now a threat to their comfort zones. She heard a quiet knock, and Emma's voice, low and guarded, came through the door. What did he say? Karoline didn't break her stride as she walked out, the blank envelope now a monument to a choice she had already made. She told Emma, "He gave me a deadline." Back in her own office, Karoline paced, the adrenaline from the meeting still coursing through her veins. "Do they think I was doing this for applause?" she asked, her voice laced with incredulity. "I have defended this administration through fire. I've spoken when no one else would, and now that I've become a threat to their comfort zones, they want me to fade." Emma, leaning against the edge of the desk, offered a pragmatic counterpoint. "He's worried about donors." Karoline scoffed. "Donors don't elect presidents. People do." She sat down at her desk and stared at her laptop screen, a blank digital page staring back at her, ready for the resignation letter. She considered it for a single, long moment, just long enough to understand what they truly wanted. It wasn't about stepping down, it was about stepping aside. And Karoline Levit had never made a habit of doing that. Later that evening, a staffer from the communications team dropped off a draft statement from McCarthy's office. It was polite, polished, and press-ready. Miss Levit has decided to step away to focus on personal growth. Karoline tore it in half without reading past the first sentence. The paper ripped with a satisfying finality. Then she pulled up a fresh document, not to write a resignation letter, but to write a speech, one that would turn the very table they tried to corner her with into her platform. By sunrise, her office looked like a campaign bunker. Printed notes sprawled across the desk, yellow highlighters marked defiant phrases, and her laptop screen flickered with talking points, not for stepping down, but for standing up. She hadn't slept, and neither had Emma, who was now balancing a phone on her shoulder, typing furiously with both hands. "Are you actually doing this?" Emma asked, her voice a mix of awe and terror. Karoline didn't look up, her eyes fixed on the screen. "They want quiet, I'm giving them clarity." She knew what was at stake. This wasn't just risking her job. This was declaring open defiance against one of the GOP's most powerful figures. There would be blowback, isolation, maybe even the president's distance if he felt cornered. But Karoline never chose this job for comfort. She chose it because she believed the truth demanded a voice, and she was the one willing to provide it.
By noon, Washington was no longer whispering. It was shouting. Word had leaked. Is Karoline Levit resigning? Did Kevin McCarthy push her out? Is the voice of fire burning too hot for the party? Fox producers texted, CNN anchors speculated, and even the New York Times ran a teaser. Internal Republican shakeup. Press secretary's position in question. Emma, her face a mask of controlled panic, leaned across Karoline's desk. "They're prepping both stories," she said, her voice a low hum of urgency. "One where you resign quietly and one where you go rogue." Karoline tapped her pen against the table, her eyes calm, a quiet storm brewing behind them. "Then let's give them a third option," she said. "The truth." She scheduled a live press statement for Friday, McCarthy's deadline. No networks were told in advance, no leaks, no coordination. Just a simple tweet from Karoline's official account. "This Friday, 11 a.m., I have something to say." Within minutes, the hashtag #CarolineSpeaks began trending. Speculation exploded, and Emma's phone, which was now vibrating with calls from McCarthy's team, was ignored. Karoline, still calm, stood before her office mirror, adjusting the silver cross at her collar. "They think I'll go down quiet," she whispered to her reflection. "But they forgot who gave me my voice." At 10:58 a.m., she stood at the podium. The room was electric. Reporters were already live, social media counters ticking upward by the second. In the front row, Kevin McCarthy's chief strategist sat with his arms crossed, his face an unreadable block of stone. Karoline looked down once at the folder in her hands, then she closed it. She didn't need paper to say what was already carved into her spine. She looked into the cameras, adjusted her cross, and took a breath. Her voice rang out, sharp and steady. "Let me be clear. No one asked me if I was ready to step aside. They told me." The press room froze. Phones hovered midair, pens stopped moving. I had until this morning to walk away quietly, to keep the peace, to make the donors comfortable. A ripple moved through the crowd, reporters shifting, whispers building. I was told I'm too loud, too young, too loyal, and too willing to say what others only hint at behind closed doors. The strategist in the front row leaned forward, his expression hardening. "They gave me a blank envelope and a polite draft. They said to say it was personal, that it was my decision. But it wasn't. Not even close." Emma, her face a mask of controlled panic, stood just off stage, her arms folded, her eyes burning with pride. "I wasn't hired to be agreeable. I was hired to tell the truth. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it threatens old alliances." Karoline paused, letting her words settle like thunder after lightning. "So I won't resign. I won't retreat. And I will not apologize for doing my job with conviction. Not for party pressure, not for political calculus, not for anyone." The room erupted, not in applause, but in a rarer sound in Washington: respect. She looked directly into the main camera, to the millions of Americans watching, and delivered her final, devastating message. When they try to shrink you to fit their image, break the frame. When they hand you a resignation letter you didn't ask for, tear it up. Then she pulled the folded paper from her blazer pocket. She opened it slowly, and in front of the entire room, she ripped it in half. The sound echoed louder than any applause ever could, and then she slammed her hand on the podium, not in anger, but in finality.
The moment Karoline ripped up the resignation letter, the world didn't just watch, it ignited. Within an hour, every major news network had aired the footage. The slow-motion clip of her slamming the podium, set to dramatic music, hit 1 million views in 30 minutes. Hashtags like "Karoline won't fold" and "ripped the script" trended globally, turning a political backroom ultimatum into a cultural moment. Conservative outlets hailed it as a defiant stand against the establishment. Liberal commentators, begrudgingly or not, admitted it was a masterstroke of political theater. Inside Republican circles, however, the reaction was far more fractured. Some strategists saw gold, a raw authenticity that could energize a disillusioned base. Others saw a ticking time bomb. The Republican National Committee issued no official statement, and McCarthy's office stayed silent save for an anonymous leak to the Hill that sneered, "Ms. Levit's behavior reflects a personal brand, not party unity." The line was meant to dismiss her, but it only gave her movement a name. In her White House office, Karoline and Emma sat watching the storm unfold across 15 different screens. "CNN's panel is torn," Emma said, scrolling through reaction videos. "One anchor called you a fire starter in a flammable town." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "They're not wrong." Her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "You did what we never dared. You're not alone anymore." It wasn't the first. Over a dozen such messages had come in since Friday, from interns, congressional aides, even a former campaign manager who had vanished after a scandal. Each one echoed the same sentiment. She hadn't just ripped paper, she had torn through silence. By Monday morning, the air inside the West Wing felt thicker. Karoline had barely stepped into her office when Emma rushed in, her phone held out like a live grenade. The screen displayed a meeting invite, plain and sterile. Location, Oval Office. Attendees, POTUS, Karoline. The silence from party leadership over the weekend hadn't been indifference, it had been strategy, waiting to corner her in person. "Should I call legal?" Emma asked, her voice a whisper. Karoline shook her head. "I'm going alone." At 11:28 a.m., she walked the marble halls toward the Oval Office,
her chin high and her pulse steady. Staffers glanced up as she passed, but this time they weren't pretending not to stare. Everyone in Washington had seen the moment she tore the letter, and now they were all waiting to see whether she would be torn down in return. The Oval Office was quiet when she entered. The president sat behind the resolute desk, flanked by two of his most senior advisors, their faces carefully arranged in expressions of cordial concern that barely hid the tension underneath. "Karoline," the president said, gesturing to the seat opposite him, "take a moment." She sat, spine straight, fingers lightly folded in her lap. The president tapped a manila folder on the desk. "You understand what you've triggered." Karoline didn't blink. Clarity. One of the advisors leaned in, his voice dripping with condescension. "What you did was reckless. You forced the Speaker of the House into a corner on live television." Karoline tilted her head. "No one forced me to corner me first." The president held up a hand, a quiet gesture of authority. "Let's be honest, Karoline. You've become a symbol. That gives you power, but it also makes you dangerous to both sides." "I'm not trying to be a symbol," she said calmly. "I just won't play dead when someone hands me a loaded envelope." The president exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers on the desk again. "You'll stay in your role, but the protection you had, that's gone." Karoline nodded once. "Good." She gave him a small, tight smile. "I never asked for a shield." As she left the Oval, aides turned to look. But this time, they weren't watching her fall. They were watching her rise. By the time she reached her office, her inbox was flooded with encrypted messages. "I watched your press conference from my basement. I cried," one read. "You've got enemies now, but you've got an army too." Karoline hadn't just been warned. She had been given a new kind of power, one that didn't come from titles or institutions, but from people who had finally found their voice in hers.
The next weekend, Karoline Levit took the stage at the Conservative Rising Voices Summit in Tampa. She hadn't been invited through official channels. In fact, her name was absent from the original speaker list. But after the explosion of support online, after the endless clips of her tearing the resignation letter and calling out her own party's complacency, the pressure had been impossible to ignore. A petition demanding she be added to the speaker list hit 100,000 signatures in under 36 hours, a public endorsement that no backroom deal could silence. Now, under bright lights and in front of a packed crowd, she stepped to the microphone. There was no script in her hand. Her dark navy blazer was a canvas for the silver cross that shimmered against it, an emblem now burned into the collective memory of the moment she refused to back down. She took one breath, and then she spoke. "I didn't come here to tell you what I think you want to hear," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I came here because someone told me to disappear, and I said no." A thunderous applause erupted. "They said I was too outspoken, too young, too unwilling to play the long game. But I'm not here to wait my turn while the country bleeds out." The audience was dead silent now, not out of disinterest, but reverence. "Some people in Washington think leadership is about who you know. I think it's about who you protect. And right now, too many Americans feel unprotected by both sides." Karoline paused, then looked directly into the cameras, her gaze piercing. "So let me be perfectly clear. I'm not here to burn the Republican Party to the ground. I'm here to make sure it finally remembers who it was supposed to serve." Cheers erupted. In that moment, she didn't sound like someone managing press logistics for another politician. She sounded like a politician in her own right. The next day, a headline in Politico declared, "Karoline's not just a voice, she's a warning shot." As she exited the stage, a young woman from a small college Republican group approached her, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and trepidation. "How did you know you were ready to speak like that?" she asked. Karoline smiled softly. "I wasn't. I was just tired of waiting for someone else to do it." That night, back at her hotel, she sat alone on the balcony overlooking the ocean. Her phone buzzed nonstop with news alerts, texts of praise and pushback. But one message stood out, from an unlisted number. "They underestimated you. We won't make that mistake again." She put the phone down, not in fear, but with clarity. She hadn't just survived the machine, she'd made it blink. And now, wherever the road led, a future campaign, a reshaped party, or just one more mic dropped in the name of truth, she knew this much.
They could ask her to step down, but they'd never stop her from standing up. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. This story is a reminder that courage still counts, and that no one gets to decide who's allowed to speak. If this story resonated with you, give it a like, share it with a friend, and let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge the script.